Are we rolling? Are we good with video? Are we good with the live streaming? It's happening. Great. Yeah, put your stuff down. Feel free to keep getting situated. I'll just get us started. My name is Edie Irons, and I'm the communications director at Transform. We're a nonprofit policy advocacy organization based in the Bay. We do work on transportation and land use solutions, trying to solve for climate and equity. And our work is focused on the Bay Area and California. And this event is actually the last event in a series we've had over the last 6 weeks called Connecting Communities. And it's looking at the intersection of those issues: transportation, housing, and climate and equity. So we've had 7 events on a whole range of topics around the Bay Area and online, and they've all been recorded and they're all available. So if you're interested and curious, you can go to transformca.org, find Connecting Communities, silence your phones, scam likely, and check out all the past events we've had, everything from how to create more sustainable access to downtowns to how to make congestion pricing advance equity, and a lot of things in between. So since this is the last Connected Communities event, I want to thank at all of our events, we're thanking our series sponsors. It's the Association for Commuter Transportation, Northern California chapter, the American Planning Association's Northern California chapter, Commute with Enterprise, EAH Housing, Eden Housing, the San Mateo County Office of Sustainability, the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the Spare the Air resource teams, and ZICLA. So those are our financial sponsors. We also have almost 20 co-hosting organizations for the series. So a kind of group of organizations, each putting on their own events. And really want to thank Swiftly for welcoming us here and for hosting us tonight. They are definitely a sponsor as well. And thank you to Anne for making us look and sound good and getting all the tech together. And we'll thank you at the end. And I really want to acknowledge my colleagues, Dave Severy and Lawrence Mason, who helped you all get in the building and up the elevator, just for your support throughout the series and really putting it all together and making it work. So thank you for being here. I'm going to moderate tonight's panel, and our speakers, actually, I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves when they come up. I think you can all handle that. I'm just going to make a few comments here to kick us off, and then I'll be running your slides as well. So that'll go smoothly. And I don't want to spend long talking about our transportation problems, because I think if we live in the Bay, we are well familiar with them. If you're here, if you're interested in these issues, you're well aware of what we're trying to solve for. We've got longer and longer commutes. Our transit is not up to the level that it needs to be for a region like ours. We've got unsafe conditions on our streets, especially for bicycles and pedestrians. And maybe you can name your, anybody want to just call out the transportation problems that get at you, or that get you up in the morning, or that get you to an event like this?
Or what you're thankful for?
Or what you're thankful for. Well, we're going to get into solutions. That is really the focus of this event. But anybody want to throw out any other gripes?
I would really like a coffee and a bagel when I get to Balboa Park, but it's in the middle of a highway.
It would be nice to have food at transit stations. Adina?
Yeah, I would like not to have hourly Caltrain after this, and not having risk to spend
An hourly wait for Caltrain.
right,
Yeah.
and in the wind tunnel in Millbrae, and horrible transport.
The wind tunnel transfer at Millbrae. 2 more. Yes,
Frequent bus service all around.
more frequent bus service all around.
It's just walking here with the event going on, it just felt like literally the streets weren't moving.
Yes, even traffic congestion on the sidewalks. Thank you, Dreamforce. Great. Well, I love that some of you phrased your problems as solutions, and that is really what we're here to talk about tonight. This is about not just solutions, but how we choose solutions and how we decide how we're going to solve the transportation's problems that we're facing. So Transform, and I think it's safe to say everyone up here and most, if not all of you, we're not looking for solutions that just do one thing. We have multiple problems and we need to be solving for multiple things at the same time. So the lens for this event is particularly to focus on solutions that solve for climate action, for equity, for increasing access and opportunity. And so that's the lens why we're focusing on some of the projects that we'll be focusing on tonight. And Plan Bay Area is our regional transportation plan. It's updated and redone every 10 years, and it's one major way that we choose solutions here in the Bay Area. So modeling, which is what we're gonna, part of what we're gonna focus on tonight, is an important part of how decisions get made about what goes into Plan Bay Area, but it's not the only criteria. And modeling, as we will hear in great detail tonight, it is both incredibly important and powerful. You have to do it, we want to do it, it's super important, and it also has major limitations, and it can introduce complications and problems, and it has blind spots. So I think anytime you have an incredibly important thing that you need to do, but that is also has a lot of limitations, we have to talk about it, we have to discuss it, we have to understand it, and we don't want to imagine that it's impossible to understand or that it's too complicated to understand. Especially for folks like us, it's incumbent that we do dig into it, and that's what we're going to do tonight. So sometimes I want us to also look out for how limitations in the modeling can also illuminate shortcomings in our systems, in our thinking, in our planning, and point to how projects or other factors affecting the projects we're looking at can be improved. And before I go any further, I also really want to appreciate the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC, for its openness and the robustness of this process. I think we discussed earlier that this might be the first regional plan of its kind where it was open to public submissions. And most of the panelists here are, we submitted public submissions for Plan Bay Area through the Horizon Initiative to be modeled along with the submissions from transit agencies and the folks who normally submit projects who are more sort of kind of on the inside of this process. So this is a novel and exciting and really hopefully trend-setting way to approach regional planning. And so I want to appreciate that and just the openness that you'll see and hear today from Anoop and from MTC. And lastly, I just want to call out the fact that, so each of the presenters and panelists made submissions to MTC through the Horizon process, but what was submitted isn't always possible to be modeled. So just listen out for, and if the panelists and Anoop can also just help us understand where there's a difference between the submission, the project submission, and what was able to be modeled. It's complex stuff. And I, for one, am not a transportation planner. You might remember I'm the communications director for Transform. So hopefully it'll all make sense to me and definitely to everybody else. So I think that's all I have. I want to, I feel sheepish actually not introducing our panel, so I will do that, except that Martha is the one last name that I didn't check on how you like to pronounce it. It's Cook, okay. Martha Cook from Arup, Chris Lepe from Transform, Ariel Fleischer from Spur, Ian Griffiths from Seamless Bay Area, and Anup Tapaze from MTC. Let's give them all a round of applause. And just to map out what we're in for, we're going to hear first from Anup, who will give an overview of modeling for Plan Bay Area. And then we're going to hear about our projects, first from Chris Lepe, then Ariel, then Ian, then Martha. I think that's right. And then we're going to go back to Anup. And Anup is going to talk about the modeling for those projects. And one spoiler alert, better for me to deliver this news than for Anup. We don't have final results yet for the transformative transportation projects that we're talking about here, but Anup is ready to share some preliminary results and kind of how it's going right now. But we're glad that MTC is actually spending extra time and effort to really get these super complex projects right. So then we'll have plenty of time for questions. And that's our agenda. I'm going to turn it over to Anup. Turn on this microphone. I'll handle your slides, and I'm going to turn mine
Am I?
off.
Yeah, I'm on.
Yep.
Awesome.
And I'm off. Oh, I'm still on.
My name is Anup Tapase. I work for Metropolitan Transportation Commission, an association of Bay Area governments. We're part of the same agency now. First, I'd like to thank for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for Transform for hosting this event. Thank you to Swiftly for allowing us to be here, and thank you to all to come here on Thursday evening. I know this is not the most opportune time to be discussing such tough material, but I'm very happy that you all are here. What we are talking about here today is this thing called project performance that we do as part of Plan Bay Area. Plan Bay Area is a regional plan, regional transportation plan, among our other things that we do every 4 years, actually, not every 10 years. And we hope to have the draft of that plan by July of next year. As part of this, we do this effort called project performance. So you may know that Plan Bay Area is a fiscally constrained plan. We think about all the revenues we have, especially in transportation, over the next 20 or 30 years, this time looking out to 2050, and how we best invest all those constrained resources. And so a big part of the investment is transportation projects. And so we don't have money to spend as a region on all these projects. And so in the last 2 plan cycles, we have used project performance as a way to help us understand what would be the best investments and how we prioritize our constrained resources. So that's an overview of what we are talking today. I have spent over the last over a year working on this effort. It's been a very collaborative effort. It's very strongly supported by our modeling team, who all have planning backgrounds too. I myself am a transportation planner. I don't know much about models, but I've learned a lot over the last year. Also, we have worked with county transportation agencies, transit agencies, in terms of developing the methodology for, I'm still on the intro slide. Yeah.
I was just testing it.
Oh, got it. In terms of developing the methodology. Hello? Yeah. The methodology to analyze all these projects, receiving like submissions from them on what projects we want to evaluate. And as Edie said, for the first time, we also open this process out to the public. We haven't done that in the past, and we thought that, yes, CTAs and transit agencies have always been in this process, but we want to hear from other people, from the public and NGOs, as to what they think might be some transformative ideas that we have not been considering as government agencies. And so that's been, been a very valuable part of this whole process. Okay, I'm gonna try this again. Is it working? Okay, great. So I will move on into the presentation now. So we want to start off by recognizing there's uncertainty ahead, and this has really been a big part of our planning process this time. We don't know, we cannot predict the future well, if that's one thing we know about the future. And so this project performance assessment is really a lens to understand how all our transportation investments would fare under different uncertain conditions. And this is only part of the work. We have multiple other projects, especially futures, the analysis, maybe you've been following it, that looks at how not just transportation investments, but also different policies might fare under these different conditions. No, that slide got shuffled up. Okay. Not sure, but this is supposed to be the slide. But anyways, the key objectives of project performance here are like how these project impacts may vary under these different conditions, but also learning from these impacts how the performance of all those projects could be enhanced. Because all these projects, many of these projects might be included in the plan, but we want all these projects to perform the best they can, right? So what policies should they be paired with to enhance their performance? And start a collaborative dialogue with not just the public, but all our CTAs and transit agencies on how we pair projects with policies. So which projects did we evaluate? So we evaluated a total of 93 projects, and we arranged them by the kind of objectives these projects are trying to serve. And a lot of, and that number that's probably drawing your attention is that 86% at the bottom. A lot of the projects the cost of the projects we evaluated were for rail projects this time. There's obviously a lot of interest for big commuter rail projects, we all are aware. But there are several like bus and road investments as well. If you scroll to the next slide, I'll quickly go over like what kind of projects these are. So when we talk about optimizing the existing transit network, yeah. So we're talking about how we enhance frequencies on Caltrain, for example, or how we make the VTA LRT go faster by undergrounding some sections of it, or even BART core capacity, which adds capacity on the tunnel, but also across the system, so we have more trains per hour. The next category was so we split that into high cost and low cost investments. It's a long list of projects. It's 26 projects under this category. But the lower cost investments are usually more bus related investments, a lot of BRT investments, increasing local, so frequency on local bus services, also some infill stations. Let's keep going. The next category is building road capacity. This may include interchange projects or some freeway widening or express lanes. Next one. I can take that too, so if it's easier, yeah. Optimizing the existing capacity of our freeways through express buses, through pricing. So how do we get our current freeways to? How do we improve the throughput of our current freeway system? Extending our rail network. So these are BART extensions, but also commuter rail extensions like Valley Link or ACE Rail, or also smart rail extensions in the North Bay. Building our core rail network. So that's a new Trans-Bay crossing. That's probably the most expensive project that we studied, but also like BART to Silicon Valley, Caltrain downtown extension, Dumbarton Rail, a lot of projects that have been getting a lot of press coverage in recent times. Building local transit. Just like extensions of LRT networks, whether it's in South Bay or San Francisco. For the first time, we also evaluated resilience investments to protect our existing infrastructure from sea level rise or earthquakes. And then finally, enhancing alternate modes too. So that includes bicycle projects or pedestrian projects, or also ferry projects. So that's the universe of projects we studied. And so I want to go over how we actually evaluated these projects. So as I said, our philosophy has been stress testing these projects under different conditions. And we drew out these 3 different divergent futures which are called rising tides, falling fortunes, clean and green, and back to the future. Things that vary across these futures are primary one being population. It ranges from about 9 million in the lowest growth future to about 14 million in the highest growth future. And this may be due to like various policies that are or trends that are out of our control. And so they represent like policies, they represent external forces that may or may not be in our control as a region. So like population or penetration of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, or preferences for housing. Do people like to live farther away, or is there preference for more housing in the core? Or does high-speed rail pan out or not? That's what varies in these conditions. The first future is the low growth future that is most similar to conditions today. There's not much difference in autonomous vehicles or electric vehicles. Population is very close to today. But the other 2 futures are really divergent futures, high growth futures, a lot more population. But clean and green is the more transit supportive future. It's very expensive to drive in this future. There's more concentrated housing, but jobs are a little more dispersed to bring the jobs closer to the housing. And there's a lot of clean vehicles in this future. In Back to the Future, also a very high growth future, but it's an auto supportive environment. It's very cheap to drive. Costs half as much to operate a vehicle than it does today. There's more dispersed housing. There's more mega regional growth. And there's more personal adoption of autonomous vehicles. So the dots, this particular chart is showing population growth. And so it's just illustrative on how population might grow. And but I don't want to dive into this because it's not really going to be part of the condition. But understand the way we model these projects is we have 3 different land uses for each of these futures on population, jobs. And then on top of that, we have layered on our transportation network. And so we have a baseline 2050 transportation network that might include things that we know are going to happen, like International Boulevard BRT or Van Ness BRT or BART to Berryessa. All these things are going to happen, and they're part of our baseline network. And so to evaluate all these projects, then we layer each project one by one on top of this network, and we see what the incremental impact is of the project. And so we use 3 assessments to evaluate the impacts of these projects. The first, our biggest assessment is the benefit cost assessment. It's a societal benefit cost assessment. So we consider all the costs of the project, and then we look at what the benefits are. I'll go over the benefits in a second, but and then we check how the benefits compare to the costs. The second one is the equity assessment. In this plan, we have really stepped our efforts in trying to understand what the equity impacts of projects are. So in terms of how projects change accessibility for people, how that might vary for people of different income levels. Now, we understand that equity is a really broad topic. It's a multifaceted issue. There are so many things we can be talking about in terms of equity. It's really hard to predict impacts of projects in the future based on different metrics within equity. But this is one approach we took to start off with to see how benefits vary across different income groups. And so if most of the benefits accrued to lower income folks that are below the median income, so say more than 60% of the benefits of projects accrue to lower income individuals, then we set a project advanced equity. If the benefits skewed more towards higher income individuals, we set the project challenged equity. But if the benefits kind of shaked out equally among all income groups, then there was even distribution of benefits. The third assessment was a guiding principles assessment. This was a high-level qualitative assessment just to draw attention to some adverse impacts that projects might have that may not come across through the other 2 analyses. Since we don't have that much time, I'm not going to go into that assessment much today. But just in terms of what's included in our benefits, and accessibility benefits is the dominant benefit of the project, right? And this implicitly takes into account the travel times, the travel costs of that people incur, what their options are to take different modes to where they want to go. But it really is measuring how much easier does a project make it for people to go where they want to go. That's what accessibility is. Wherever people want to go, whether it's to jobs or schools or parks, is the project enabling, making it a little easier for them to get to where they want to. But apart from that, we also consider various other benefits. For example, transit crowding is a big thing we included this time. And that's not about like whether people are comfortable or not using transit crowding. It's more about if transit is crowded, how does that change people's decisions in using transit? someone might choose to not take BART, but go and drive instead, and that matters, and that's what we want to capture through that. But we also take into account emissions, health benefits from walking or biking, safety benefits from decreased collisions. So we take all these benefits and then we monetize them using research on like how we monetize all these benefits, and that's why we arrive at a benefits dollar number. On the cost side, we consider capital costs, operating costs, what the cost of rehabilitation of segment or replacing a bus every 14 years or a train every 30 or 40 years. We take all those costs into account to come up with the life cycle cost of a project. And so that's how we come up with the benefit cost ratio. And so I want to acknowledge that this assessment is definitely more robust than prior cycles. It is our best effort so far. However, as Edie also pointed out, all analyses that are based on models have limitations. It's based on what assumptions go in there. And so while it is our best effort, it is definitely not the only consideration when we think about how we prioritize projects in a fiscally constrained plan. That I want to jump into key findings, and these are quite high-level findings, and by presenting them at such high level, we tend to lose some nuances, which many people recognize. But still, I think we think it's worth discussing these findings because there's a lot of insights to learn from them. Our first finding is costs of projects are just significantly high, and the cost of projects we evaluated are over $400 billion this time. We don't have that kind of revenues to be able to deliver all those projects. Many of our projects that we have evaluated last time have gone up in costs. For example, projects have risen in costs over the last many years, but also all these big, new, bold ideas that people have put forward are really expensive, and we ought to be thinking about how we manage costs as a region and how we deliver projects as a region. We found that project performance, and this is not surprising, is significantly affected by external conditions, those external forces I was talking about in the 3 different futures. For example, most of our projects did not perform well in that lowest growth future, rising tides, falling fortunes, really highlighting that the importance of this transportation and land use connection, right? Many times we are always trying to solve transportation issues with transportation projects, and that's definitely like the mindset of, even if it's not the mindset of folks in this room, it's the mindset of the folks who are making decisions at the higher levels, right? How we think about policies that generate more land use growth around stations, for example, that we see in those higher growth futures like Clean and Green or Back to the Future, how that can enhance performance of these different transportation projects. So, so really in this plan, we don't want to talk about transportation projects by themselves. We really want to think about how they can be paired with complementary strategies that enhance their performance and resilience, such as land use strategies near new stations or even pricing strategies to boost demand. So looking at like what projects were resilient across all futures, lower cost transit improvements such as urban bus rapid transit lines, or improving frequencies on local bus networks, or just resilience projects to save our heavily used transportation assets from sea level rise might be the best bet in uncertain future. Many of these projects are easier to implement too, and they should be seen as low-hanging fruit and advanced to implementation soon. So as I said, we evaluated a lot of commuter rail projects, high-cost commuter rail projects, and they really have mixed performance outcomes. I'm talking about, so a project like the Trans-Bay rail crossing, right? We evaluated a commuter rail version of it, and that performed pretty well. It performed, that had a benefit cost ratio about 1 in both the high growth futures. So did Valley Link that established like a consistent service from outside the region to inside the region. But other projects like Dumbarton Rail or Smart Extensions, or even the ACE expansion project is not really perform well across all futures. And we need to think about like why they may not perform well, because we do not take some things into account in this analysis, such as placemaking benefits of rail, right? That is huge. How like building BART to San Jose like really enhances, can really provides opportunities for growth in the downtown areas. But again, that is all contingent on land use policies in those areas supporting that kind of growth. Downtown San Jose probably will have policies supporting that kind of growth, but many other areas are not very enthusiastic about growth in their areas. So thinking about how these rail projects can actually would or would not be actually be supported by those kind of policies. Also, it should not be coming as a surprise that these benefits, the benefits of such projects go predominantly towards high income groups. I mean, that's reflective of the ridership on many of these, on many of the existing commuter rail trains like ACE or Caltrain. And so we saw that in many of these projects, they actually challenged equity by accruing benefits to higher income populations. So again, like what policy should we be thinking about to address that, whether it's like means-based fares on these things or other efforts to like reduce fares for transfers, for example. But also that may only, that may like help the fare issue, but may not be addressing where these commuter rail projects serve, right? Generally, they serve urban downtown areas that might have more white-collar jobs. And so how do land use, or even like housing communities that are more upscale, so how do we think about land use policies that in the long term enable more people of all income levels to use these expensive transportation assets? So some projects have synergies while others compete with each other. I mean, we have always received the critique that we study all these projects at an individual level. We don't study them as a seamless integrated network, which is when like all the benefits of these projects would actually rise. And we really hear that critique, and it's true. And this time we did take some effort to evaluate some projects together. For example, we studied the commuter rail crossing in conjunction with all the Caltrain improvements, and that definitely, the Caltrain improvements definitely perform better when it's paired with the commuter rail crossing. We studied mega regional rail a project together, which like brought in all the commuter rail projects together, not the crossing, but almost everything else. And this did boost ridership on some of the individual lines by 20 or 30% when compared to their individual performance. But I do want to caution that just because projects are become part of this integrated network, that does not necessarily somehow make those projects a strong performer. Maybe if the benefit cost ratio of the project is 0.5, if the ridership boosts by 20 or 30%, that benefit cost ratio may go up to 0.6 or 0.7. More land use policies that help support further ridership may boost it to 0.8 or 0.9. But then that's still $3 billion of an investment that could be well spent on many other investments that have well high benefit cost ratios. And so in a fiscally constrained environment, we really should be thinking about how projects and policies complement each other, and also being careful to understand like how projects might degrade benefits of each other. For example, like freeway widening along the 580 corridor can well degrade the benefits of what Valley Link is is thought to bring in that corridor. We did find that pricing is really the most powerful tool to affect traffic congestion and travel patterns. Of course, this is going to come with severe equity concerns on how we are tolling people. But rather than adding highway capacity, we really think we should be integrating pricing strategies to manage congestion on freeways, but not just freeways, but also like congestion pricing in downtown areas. But definitely they have to be paired with meaningful toll discounts and also like meaningful alternatives for like transit, especially for still the system to still be accessible for people of all income levels. On the transit side too, fare reforms could really meaningfully change travel behavior. I'll come more to this in the second part of my presentation, but we did see like transit demand is quite sensitive to fare restructuring. So we think that reforming the Bay Area's complex fare systems could like significantly grow ridership. However, this should really be paired with capacity increases as well, because our current transit system is not equipped to handle that like significant increase in demand that might come about. Again, this one too, I'll go into greater depth later, but I'll share like how we model this bike investment. But we think that a greater investment in bicycle investment throughout the region, especially in more urban areas, can have significant regional benefits on the transportation system, health benefits, emissions benefits, but most importantly, like accessibility benefits, and moving people from cars to more active modes. And so we are definitely advocating for our plan to consider a larger investment in active transportation. And then finally, among all the mega projects we studied, the Trans-Bay Rail Crossing emerged as the most cost-effective one. It has the accessibility benefits it provides are more than 2 or 3 times the next biggest project we studied. The impacts it has in alleviating transit crowding, or just like bringing on like many more passengers in that most congested corridor, like really changes travel patterns in the region. So I just want to quickly share like the actual results of like all these projects. So this slide is showing the most cost-effective projects with BC ratio greater than 1 in all futures. So our most resilient projects too. And you can see the only high-cost project in this list is BART core capacity, which is the 3rd row on there, which really adds capacity to the BART system. But most of these other projects are smaller scale, cheaper investments, adding most of the BRT lines, or like frequency improvement on bus services, or as I said, like even those resilience investments to save our heavily used freeways. But even though you see like all the green here on the benefit cost ratio, the story on the equity side is a mixed bag, right? So when we are thinking about prioritizing these projects, we also want to make sure that these projects are not challenging equity, or if they are, what kind of policies we should be pairing those projects with to make sure they help at least provide even distribution of benefits, if not advanced equity. I'll come to that to the end in the end of our presentation, how we did that project. So that is a very unique project in terms of how we modeled it, but I will go over that in more detail. These are some additional cost-effective projects with BC ratio greater than 1 in 2 of the futures. So the first 4 lines are all the Trans-Bay crossing. As I said, that was the only big, like super big project that brought about benefits in both the high growth futures. Valley Link is up there too. But some of the other bus projects like Muni Forward, more improvements from Muni Forward, as well as the Samtrans El Camino Real BRT. These are preliminary draft findings. We are at the stage where we have shared this with transit agencies, operators. We're sharing that with you now, and we are accepting feedback from all our stakeholders. Our final version of our findings will be released in January. Also, like, what are some least cost-effective projects, right? So many of the BART extensions we studied. There's a lot of interest in BART extensions. Everyone wants BART in their communities, but it's not always cost effective. Also the smart extensions in the North Bay. I mean, there's very low ridership on the line today, and so those were not cost effective either. So, I mean, I'm showing you the most cost effective and least cost effective. As I said, we evaluated 93 projects, or maybe there's 12, not including the 12 public submission projects, so that say 81 projects. Most of those projects are not being shown here, right? They fall in that middle bucket. And so we are really thinking now, if we are talking about including these projects in the plan, how do we enhance the performance of all those projects? Not just those projects, but even these high-performing projects. What policy should we be thinking about so they all perform well when we actually invest our dollars in them? Then we wanted to focus on projects that actually advance equity, and so this was advanced equity in both futures. And you'll see like this list is reflects like kind of the ridership that we see on these systems today too, like BART or VTA LRT or AC Transit, right? These projects these are the systems where we see a more diverse use, more diversity in use by different population, as opposed to again, like, all these may not be good on the benefit cost ratio side, but as opposed to like some commuter rail projects or some specific BART extensions in some specific neighborhoods that we know what kind of communities these are and who lives there, and therefore like who would actually be benefiting from these assets. So with that, I'm done. I think I'm going to hand it over to the rest of the speakers and then come back later to talk about more about these transformative projects from the public, and I will be addressing the bike infrastructure projects too.
Can you just let people know if they want to spend more time with these slides? Is there a place where this
Sure.
information is publicly available?
Oh yeah, so this is all it's public on our website. We shared this with our commission, which is our board that we report to. Sorry, I know I've gone over time, so I don't want to take more time, but we shared this with our commission about 2 weeks ago, and so this is public. It's on our website. If necessary, I'm happy to share those materials after this event too, by email. It was about a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, that's the commission I'm talking about. Our planning committee. It's not the full commission, but the planning committee and the ABAG administration committee, which that's the committee that works more on planning issues. Okay, I think is Chris our next speaker.
Yeah.
Thanks, Denise.
Ah, okay, there. Sorry about that. Whoops. I was messing with yours. Well, so maybe in the interest of time, as these are coming up. So again, Chris Lepe, Regional Policy Director at Transform. Been with the organization for quite a few years for those of you that know me. And I live in the South Bay, so I'm kind of representing the suburban sprawl that exists across much of the Bay Area, outside of some of the places like San Francisco. And so first question for you all, if you had a reliable, efficient option that was an alternative to driving that got you to your destination 10 minutes faster than driving, would you use it? Raise your hand. How many of you would use it? Okay, that's practically all, if not maybe all, most people in the room certainly. And MTC's survey that they conducted, their express lane, managed lane survey, found that 71% of respondents, over 1,000 people that they surveyed, currently drive alone, but over half would use an express bus if it was reliably 10 minutes faster than driving. So the point there is, a lot of people will use these options if they exist. The problem is that we don't have that yet. So we have what currently exists is, this is a map that I think Ariel and I dug up about our regional express bus services in the Bay Area. Unfortunately, please don't try to use this as a way to get around, because some of these routes don't exist anymore. And there are new routes that exist since the time of the production of this map. And so we have an incomplete regional network with multiple providers. That service varies widely, fluctuating from one year to the next, doesn't function as a network, and there's incomplete information out there. There is no regional express bus map that you can check out online to know where you need to go and be able to seamlessly integrate or get from an express bus to the regional rail system. And part of the other issue is that these express bus services are stuck in increasing traffic just like the rest of us. So there's no incentive oftentimes to take these options, as well as to carpool and other high occupancy modes. So this is an image of our existing carpool HOV network, and you can see the amount of degradation that exists. And this was just from a few years ago, so it's probably been more degraded since then. So we have little priority for high occupancy modes or incentives to take transit or carpool on our highways, and the buses are stuck in traffic, even in areas where these lanes exist. And the other thing I'll point out, by the way, is that there's a lot of gaps in our existing carpool lane network. So we have this thing that's called express lane or express lanes that you'll see is being built across the region on 880 right now. It's about to open 101 in San Mateo County. And the thing to recognize about this map, this is MTC's express lanes network as part of Plan Bay Area 2040. About 500 miles worth of express lanes, and about half of those miles are lane widening. So a lot of it is conversion, but the other half roughly represents new capacity, new lanes. But very importantly, there's a lot of areas in red, and those areas that in red represent areas that actually can't physically be widened, and therefore, under the current plan, that will not be express lanes. So you're going to have a lot of bottlenecking even within the current plan. So Transform for years has been advocating for a different approach, that is an approach based on express lane implementation based on conversion of existing lanes rather than adding more lanes. And then making sure that we're optimizing those lanes so that we're moving way more people through transit, through transportation demand management measures such as free transit passes for area workers, as well as van pools and carpools. And very importantly, as Anoop referred to, is making sure that we're doing, implementing these express lanes in an equitable manner, so that we're considering things like subsidized transit fares, things like means-based tolls and other strategies, and in focusing the investments, such as transit investments, to benefit communities of color and low-income communities that desperately need these transportation options, especially within the context of the suburbanization of poverty, folks getting pushed out further out in the reaches outside of where our transit systems exist. So on Highway 101, we've been advocating for many years and have made the case, and MTC actually did some back on the envelope kind of assessment and found that indeed our report that we produced a few years ago was accurate, that we can go from what is typical in a general purpose lane of moving 2,000 people in the lane to 8,000 people per hour. And if you think about that, that's effectively doubling the capacity of Highway 101. It's like constructing a whole new Highway 101, just in that one lane. So that's what we're talking about when we when we refer to optimizing our highways, is trying to move far more people in existing space with fewer cars. And so in comes this opportunity, this amazing opportunity to submit a project, a transformative project to MTC. And at first it was a text-only submission. Look at the time I have left here. A text-only submission. And then we met with MTC planners and tried to figure out how we could incorporate the submission in the context of what they can do in the modeling. So effectively, transportation demand management measures, van pooling, carpooling strategies, a lot of those kind of approaches that we would want to incorporate into this approach could not be modeled, and therefore could not be part of our transformative project submission. But I'll just say that with our approach, we would want these kind of things to be incorporated along with things like seamless, integrated, affordable fares. But that being said, the one thing that we agreed could be modeled is transit. And then it came down to the question of who is going to dream up this transit network that we can superimpose upon this new express lane network that would be a seamless network throughout the Bay Area that would allow for free flow transit at like 45-mile-an-hour speeds or greater during the peak hours. And so we decided to figure it out at Transform. Luckily, we had an in-house consultant that did a lot of this work pro bono, and his name is Alan Hoffman. So if you guys ever bump into him, please tell him thank you very much for this amazing work of art here that he has produced. And so what the whole idea, the concept was, is we created 30 stations, hubs, major hubs across the region. And the location of those hubs are based on where people live, where people work, the greatest destinations, and employment centers and residential centers of the Bay Area. But it's not enough just to drop someone off in the middle of a highway, as we know. We need to make sure that we're connecting folks from the highway to those important destinations, such as community colleges and so many other locations that are not near our highways. And so the key here, as I mentioned, is that with these express lanes as a foundation, we will have 45-mile-an-hour speeds on a transit system here that we are creating that will beat driving alone by a lot in many cases. So if you look at traveling from the East Palo Alto station, just in today's travel times, with Rex, it'll take 15 minutes to get to Newark, 55 minutes in congested auto time. So how many of you are going to use Rex if it's going to exist in a few years as opposed to driving? If you don't have your hand up, I gotta ask why. But and so Livermore, an hour and 14 minutes by Rex, 2 hours and 10 minutes by driving. And of course, what I haven't mentioned is it's also a lot faster than any other transportation option that we have today. So this is just an example of the kind of analyses that that Alan conducted and looking at the job centers and where people are coming from. And just a little bit of an illustration in terms of the way that we thought about getting folks from the Rex hubs to the various different destinations that surround them. So a few examples here. You can see in San Mateo County, we hit up, for example, the East Palo Alto station, and we connect to other areas like downtown Palo Alto. We hit up portions of the El Camino corridor, which is the highest ridership route or corridor in San Mateo County. Over in the East Bay, we're connecting to a lot of locations, a lot of destinations that are off of our highways as well, and creating a real, effectively like BRT, world-class BRT services on some of these major arterials where we have a lot of destinations taking place. We're connecting to major business parks like Hacienda and Bishop Ranch, places that are not accessible to the public, relatively speaking right now, and to the kind of destinations that folks really want to get to and need to get to, like De Anza College in the South Bay. We've got Mission College as well, the 49er Stadium. And here's a little zoom in shot of one of the examples of the kind of connectivity that surrounds and that is connected to these hubs with, for example, connecting to the future, hopefully someday, dense urban Valco Center, the Apple campus, the hospital, Kaiser Permanente on Lawrence Expressway, and so on and so forth. So the kind of coverage increase that we see in places like Silicon Valley goes from what it is today with, by the way, some of this rapid transit is not so rapid, as for those of you that know, to a truly rapid network and much greater coverage. So think about the number of people that will be served with this kind of system. One of the things I will also say, well, first of all, yes, this project will be quite expensive. This is just a transit component I haven't talked about. We don't actually know yet about the cost for the express lanes, and MTC is doing further analysis in terms of the cost. But the transit component would be somewhere between $12 and $18 billion, according to our back on the envelope calculations. But we'll know more soon from MTC's estimates. But one thing that is different about this is than a traditional, for example, BRT corridor or transit extension is that we are generating revenue from these express lanes. So that revenue generation can go into things like capital improvements, such as the stations. It can go towards, helping to subsidize the transit services and even having affordable fares as part of this proposal. So, and the other very important thing that people are really excited about whenever I go talk to folks like you is that this is, if you think about it, leveraging our existing infrastructure, which is already fully grade separated, our highways, right? And so we're creating a system where there is no stopping at lights. And so as a result, it's very efficient. And, I think we'll see. We'll have to see what the results are very soon. So very excited to hear more from Anoop, and happy to field any questions afterwards. So I'm at 12 minutes, so 2 minutes after what I was supposed to end. So thanks everyone, and I'm going to pass it on to Ariel.
Oh, thank you. I didn't realize I was next.
We can have somebody else.
No, I'm ready. Put my hair up. Do this. Okay. Microphone. Great. So my name is Ariel Fleischer, and I serve as Spur's Transportation Policy Director. Very excited to be here tonight to talk about our submission to the project performance assessment process. And again, just to echo how awesome it was to have this opportunity to be able to submit projects, things that we've been working on from a civic group, from our perspective, and to be able to see how they would really impact the region. So it's very kudos, because it really is a neat thing that MTC did as part of this. Oh, I have the clicker. Ready. Okay. For those of you unfamiliar with SPUR, SPUR is a nonprofit member-supported organization, and our goal is to promote good planning and good government through research, education, and advocacy. As I mentioned, I'm SPUR's Transportation Policy Director. A lot of my work focuses on the customer experience, which I'll talk about tonight, as well as leading our work into new mobility. So real quickly, we did submit about fare integration, and so I want to talk a little bit about how fares work today. I might go through some of these slides quickly because there might be too much detail for this audience, but I really think it's important to say, well, if we're going to integrate our fares, why? Why should we be doing this? So what is fare policy? Briefly, you can think of it as the rules. It's the rules that define how much people pay for transit, and has 4 main components: your structure, zones, distance, actual price, how do you pay for that trip, and finally those discount categories. You've been hearing a lot about means-based tonight, so that's an example of a discount category. So when we talk about integrated fares, it's important to define that term. So what's integrated fare? So you can think about multi-operator or integrated fare policy as when transit operators working together to align their fare policies and collectively organizing their fare structures so that transferring, actually moving between systems, becomes simpler and more affordable. So think of that, so it's moving between systems, that's really the crux, becomes simpler and more affordable. So important, why we care about fares is that fares really impact all aspects of the transportation system. And sometimes I think why I dedicated my life's work to this esoteric topic, which is kind of like the eat your peas of transportation, but it really is, it's super, super, super important because fares touch everything. They touch ridership, they touch revenue, the user experience, marketing, service reliability, and planning. So how do fares work today? Well, they don't work that great today. Our fare policy is super disjointed. There is some instances of fare coordination in the Bay Area, but it's really ad hoc. You might get a 50-cent transfer here or a 25-cent transfer there. There might be some sub-regional coordination, some sub-regional passes, but for the most part, it's super disjointed. And as this screen really suggests, right? So across the fare strategies, the price of a trip, the price of a day pass, the loyalty projects, but all of these just completely vary from one operator to the next. We have a lot of bifurcation in our system. It's very disjointed with respect to fares. So why did we submit it? Why did we submit fare integration to MTC's call for projects? In other words, what's wrong with our fare policy? And the first reason we did it was because riders want integrated fares. Something that we saw MTC found through their Clipper research, that transit riders want riding multiple transit services to be easier and more affordable, and they made suggestions for how that could be. So I think that's really clear that this is something that people really want. People want integrated fares. We put a lot of money into our Clipper system. We spend a lot of money in Clipper, and all these disparate fares, they impact the usability and the appeal of Clipper. So MTC's done a lot of surveying, we've done a lot of our own surveying, and we found that riders struggle to understand what this card does because it acts as a mask. So people struggle to understand if Clipper supports transfers and discounts. Does it work across all these systems? Does it support cash in addition to passes? Because we ask people to remember all those different things, and that's really hard, so they just pay with cash because there's no surprises when you're paying with cash. Disparate fares make using transit confusing. So this is the same, these are clips from operator websites, and these are the same passes described on the different websites. I won't get into these, but it's just complicated. There's too many words to assume that this is easy to understand the price of a ride or what you get. Another example of this is one of my favorites. I pick on Caltrain, but they have since changed this. They listed their interagency discounts under miscellaneous, which I think really speaks to how, but I think that speaks to this larger issue of how much we didn't think about fares or care about fares ahead. They were this ancillary thing when in fact we know that they're really impacting travel behavior. And again, I will note that Caltrain has since changed their website and it's much better. So it's like one of my big advocacy achievements of my life. And the last piece I'll note too is that riders really want integrated fares, as we noted. And if the public sector doesn't deliver it, the private sector will. So this is an example from London where they created the City Mapper Pass that combines the tube and biking and taxis, and it's selling like crazy. People are going after this. It's a completely private sector product, and it's not an app. It's not a scooter. It's fare policy is what they did. They combined all these different places and they created a fare policy that didn't exist before. So again, really thinking ahead as a public sector with tools, with open payments, with being able to pay for your credit card, they can create the fare policy the public sector can't. And what does that mean? What do we lose when we don't define our own fare policy anymore? And just frankly, why do we submit this? Because many people, and this is in spite of all of these challenges that I just listed, many people do use more than one operator to move about the region. So imagine if we actually had a fair policy that supported that. How would this chart change? What would these colors look like? We think it would be exponentially different. This is unfortunately getting cut off. But another reason why we submitted this project is because if you look across the globe, well, this works. This is an example from Transport for New South Wales, where they said, hey, we want people to take complete journeys. We've actually designed our transportation system so that people transfer from the bus to the train to the ferry. Sound familiar? We do that here too. And they started giving people, a $2 Australian discount when they went from one system to another, and multimodal trips increased by 50%. So they created a fair policy that incentivized using the entire transportation system as a network. And they saw trips go up by 50%. So we submitted this project because we've seen evidence from our other regions that this is real and we can make a big difference in transit ridership. And so earlier this year, we published our paper, Solving the Bay Area's Problem. And I think the big takeaway from this is if we want our transportation system to work as a network, if we want to maximize all of these investments, another example I always give is that we're extending the smart train to Larkspur, to the ferry terminal. We create infrastructure to facilitate connection, so we don't also have those ancillary supports in the sense of our fares and also our maps and our branding. So if we want our transportation system to work as a network, those pieces of it that create that are very essential to that, those also need to work well. So integrated fares 1, we did really well in the modeling process, at least from my preliminary understanding, which we'll get into today. I will go quickly through that one. So this is MTC did last week, or 2 weeks ago, they held a transportation workshop. I took a screenshot, a picture of the impact of fares. But the idea here is if we put a lot of money, essentially $1 million into fare policy, we get. So if we put a high investment into our fare policy, i.e. we actually fund it significantly, you see 1 million daily net new boardings. And this doesn't have the context, but if you look at, when you go to the grocery store, you're like, should I buy these granola bars or those granola bars? And you figure out the unit cost. So I was trying to figure out the unit cost of all of these. But fares did really well as compared to, and I think this goes back to what you were saying about a lot of these quote lower cost investments did really well. And we saw a really significant increase in boardings from making our fare policy change. And I think that's really neat. And I think MTC, there will be a blueprint for an implementation part of this, but I did want to echo that just because the model says it's so, it doesn't mean it's easy to implement. This goes for a lot of our projects. We're going to talk about 10,000 lanes of micromobility network. It's really hard to get one lane done. So just really keeping and being cognizant of how making these big changes that the models are showing are really good are actually really hard to achieve. So even small changes can have direct impacts with respect to fares, that we can solve for our revenue impacts, but they are there. That no single municipality or transit agency can really solve this problem by themselves, that it requires collaboration. And there's just a whole lot of things to consider when it comes to actually integrating our fare policy. So in case I wasn't sure if folks are familiar or know about this, but a really big milestone happened this year. I think Ian's also going to talk about this as well. But for the first time, the region hasn't actually studied fare integration in over 10 years. And in the absence of real information, this fear, this is going to impact my revenues poorly, this is going to drive down ridership, it's really allowed the status quo to kind of fester. But we're really excited that MTC recently approved an allocation of funding to support a business case for fare integration. So we're going to actually have some new information on, well, if we did this to our fares, what would really happen? This is going to go beyond what they look at in the modeling, thinking about different fare structures and different fare concepts for our region. So it really is a huge step forward, and it's very, very exciting that this is actually happening. This is a picture from Toronto. They have 11 different transit operators, so we often look to them for inspiration, though they're not as crazy as us with our 27. And they did a business case, and it was a very successful way to help them understand the impacts of integrating fares across their operators. So just some reflections. I think we've talked a lot about tonight around how models are only so good. And I think what the work that MTC has done is really impressive and exciting, and it has given us a ton of information. But it is, as Edie noted, it's important to be cognizant of where those limitations are so we can debate them and think about them. So on the project performance assessment, as Anoop mentioned, the projects that are network performed well, and that's interesting and important. Something we've been talking a lot, and this is from my colleague Laura Tulkoff, talks about this, who has a real rich, deep background in scenario planning. Should we carry the scenarios into Plan Bay Area, or does that limit our solution space? And you'll notice earlier that not a lot of projects scored well across all three of those. And this is really a question I don't necessarily have an answer, but we have these defined futures, and we only now have a short set of solutions. So are they the right tool? Laura gave the analogy, it's like bringing a Swiss Army knife camping. No, I didn't quite get that right. But the point is are they the right tool to bring into the Plan Bay Area? And I don't have an answer there, but again, it's an open question for us to think about it, if that's the right way to be doing this. And then Anoop's notes mentioned this as well. A lot of the projects that had a really high benefit cost ratio didn't score that well on equity. So is this a question of how we're scoring equity, how we're scoring our projects, or are some of these really not compatible, and what does that mean? Again, a question for us to wrestle with. The Plan Bay Area, this assessment doesn't look at projects for which money is already committed, but should we? Should we just take on face value that things that we've decided in the past were right then are still right now? Is that a good way of doing things? And finally, I did want to make a few notes on equity, and I think to Anoop's point, equity is very multidimensional, and there's a lot to it, and there's only so much you can really produce in a model, but it really is really multidimensional. And when we have this single metric around its cost, right? It's income, it's access, the metric of equity, accessibility benefits. I think a lot about how the fact that a lot of what exists today is really inequitable. When we think about something like congestion pricing, when folks are queuing on the Bay Bridge, all that pollution is going into our lower income neighborhoods. And so when we clear up that congestion, we're solving for an existing inequity. Or the fact that folks who are lower income, who really cannot be late to their jobs, when they're stuck in traffic on a bridge or in a car, that's a real burden on them. So because equity is so multifaceted, there are a lot of ways in which current inequities aren't really captured in this assessment, and also racial equity, geographic equity, other dimensions of equity. And I'll also note too, we talk a lot about how these projects that provide access to white collar jobs. Well, we want to give people with lower incomes the opportunity to reach middle class jobs. And that's a lot of what these transportation investments can do. And I think that's really important to not get stuck in the mindset that lower income people have low income jobs, et cetera. How can we give people more access to those higher income or middle wage jobs? And that's what our regional transportation system should do. So again, equity is very complex. I think it's very important that we debate all these different parts of it, and especially as it's reflected in the project performance assessment. And finally, just some notes on modeling as an exercise, as a concept, which is also fun to think about and wrestle with. People's transportation choices are really complex, and that's really important. There's only so much of that complexity that a model can genuinely account for. Our lives are messy. A lot of the status quo is in the model, and I think that's just also a fact of the assumptions that go into it. And a question of how we let models get in the way of our common sense. And I ask this in particular with respect to the fare integration, that this is something, if you went out to a platform and you talk to riders, I really need to end. People know that fares are a problem, but we still had to go through this entire exercise to prove it so. So again, are we over-relying? Talking to customers, customer experience is hard to model. The secret modeling is really, do we just need really visionary and bold leadership to make things happening? And modeling needs a strong vision, and Ian's going to speak to that. So a lot of information, but again, thank you for having me and for doing this as part of this process.
Thanks. So I'll try to be really quick because our submission was actually also fare integration, and I want to actually call out Jason Lee, so there were 3 different submissions that included fare integration, and MTC picked all 3. They're all slightly different submissions. So I'm the policy director of Seamless Bay Area, which is a nonprofit. And our mission is to transform the Bay Area's fragmented and inconvenient public transit into a world-class, unified, equitable, and widely used system by doing 2 things: building a diverse movement for change and actually promoting the specific policy reforms that can get us there. This work is part of, articulating a clear vision. We're also trying to raise public awareness about issues around governance in particular. we're trying to change the professional culture for many of us who work in this field. We're actually in the process of trying to advance some specific legislative reforms that could create some changes in the very near term. And then looking at tactical opportunities. And I think that this is where the MTC the competition was really an opportunity for us to really take a stab at something that isn't such a long-term initiative. So this is our kind of fragmented transit map that we have created. Obviously, there's many different transit agencies, a lack of overall service standards, including on fares, and a planning, many aspects of planning, including fare policy, are done on an agency by agency level. Seamless Bay Area is what we mean when we talk about a seamless system. Is a connected rapid transit network that is strategically planned at the regional level to actually work as a system, where transit agencies, and there could be many of them, and they're work together to operate different parts of that integrated network, but in a way where many things are standardized and to be as consistent as possible and simple as possible for the end user, including fares, schedules, service quality, wayfinding, and other core components that impact people's decision of whether or not to use transit. And where our transit investments are prioritized to advance, the goals of the network overall. So this is our vision map that we have developed as not as a specific proposal of all the rapid transit lines we should be building, but a tool of like how our network might look if we actually planned it out as an integrated system where buses and express buses, local rapid buses, subway and commuter rail were all actually shown on the same map, first of all, but also done as a system. And I think just to speak to, I think this is we actually collaborated early on with the Transform team on the Rex proposal. We get that question a lot, is like, what do you think about Rex? And we said, we love Rex. It's really consistent, just sort of the thin green lines are our express bus, component of the network. And I think that's just a more fleshed out version, a vision of how exactly that could work in the context of an integrated system. I just want to call out, what is the promise of this type of approach in regions that are just as complex as the Bay Area, geographically dispersed polycentric regions. Greater Frankfurt is an area that has many more municipalities than we have, more transit agencies, but since instituting reforms that, among other things, created a common fare policy, but also paired that with making service consistent, service standards, and they have seen a 60% growth of transit ridership since the mid-90s as compared to 16% in the Bay Area. They are now at a region-wide transit mode share of 19%. Doesn't seem that impressive. It's 3 times what we are at, but it's obviously much higher in more urban areas. So this is the potential of this type of framework over the long term, over a couple of decades. So our submission for the MTC process was actually fare, service, and branding integration. And we know that fare integration was picked out specifically from that. But when we were very clear in our submission that we actually think you have to do them all. And we would like them to be evaluated as one set of things, because you don't really get the benefits of any of these things individually. Like the sum of all of these things is greater than doing each of them individually. And they really build off of each other. So, we can integrate our fares, but so long as our service, so long as Caltrain only has hourly frequencies and BART has 15-minute frequencies, or so long as County Connection in Contra Costa County only has hourly bus service, the fare discount that you're going to get, like how much more likely you're going to use that service. Whereas if we bring up those service levels of those local bus operators and Caltrain and everything into a common, set of frequencies and speeds alongside the integrated fare policy, and then we communicate it to people. We communicate the promise of that network through excellent branding and wayfinding and consistent and clear customer information that actually shows how easy it is to get around transit, that is where we're going to see huge increases. And that's where, like, the Frankfurt example and many other examples in other regions, that's where they're seeing a huge growth. So we can't just model branding integration. I don't think that's going to show huge, and service, fare integration on its own is going to be limited in terms of how it modeled. And I'm excited to learn how, actually, I just found out, last week, that it sounds like MTC is actually doing some work on the service integration piece as well. So I will skip this slide. This is some principles that we support of, like, what some principles that MTC is actually adopting into their current business case study as far as the objectives of what an integrated fare system would look like. These are some examples from other places, including a zone-based system whereby, essentially, rather than worrying about how many transit agencies you're taking or how many modes you're taking, you sort of count the zones that you're going through, and that determines your fare regardless of how many agencies you might transfer at. And that requires a fundamentally different way of collecting revenue and distributing it to various operators than we have right now. And in these regions, in Zurich and in Frankfurt, they have dozens of different operators, but it's seamless for the user. These are more kind of radial networks from, I believe, Paris and London, yes. But similar concept of zone-based rings. So this is something we're working on right now, and I'm interested to hear how MTC actually modeled this work. But we're just doing some thinking about, like, what might a zone-based system, as one example of an integrated fare system, not to say it's the best example. The business case will hopefully shed more light on what the different pros and cons of a zone-based system versus a fare by distance versus a flat fare system might look like. But one question we've been thinking about is, like, so how big are these, if we had a zone-based system like the Zurich or Frankfurt example, how big are these zones? Like, how far do you have to travel before you enter into the next category? And we have some existing zone-based systems right now, like Caltrain and Smart and Golden Gate Transit. So, we looked at 10 mile, 5 mile, sort of 7.5 miles for some reason, sort of the size of San Francisco seems like like maybe the right number, the right size of a zone, and thinking about, thinking about how you might cover the whole Bay Area with a set of these zones as just a tool to help the public visualize what it might look like, and maybe at some point give MTC an idea to actually model more specifically in terms of how would a system like this impact the cost of getting from that circle to this circle, and how would that compare with the different options that we have right now. So that's some work we're working on right now. Hopefully, can make it be thrown into the mix as MTC is pursuing fare integration over the next year. I'm going to end by just making a couple of comments about our approach to planning in the Bay Area, and how this entire process, is sort of based on a particular type of project identification and planning process that we might want to rethink. So the way we develop projects and model them is we start with this thing of new project idea. This is from an MTC document, but new project ideas are generated somehow by cities, by local advocacy groups. It's unclear exactly. They can come from many different places, and there's no defined process by which we come up with these new project ideas. They get reviewed. They ultimately get analyzed through long-range plans, both at the county-wide level and at the regional level, and that's what Plan Bay Area is. Then they get assessed and selected, and then they get incorporated into long-range transportation investment plans on certain cycles. And that's our current process. And what's missing, it's missing a strategic regional vision to actually drive the project identification. So starting from the end goal that we want and working back to identify the projects that will get us there, but it's sort of starting with ideas and then modeling how far those ideas might take us. So by contrast, and now that it's not working, I only have one more slide. A network approach to long-range planning is something that, in particular, like the Seattle, Puget Sound region, but also Vancouver, I'm aware of examples, Vancouver and Canada are taking. That is a very, very different approach in terms of starting with a vision of an integrated network, setting ambitious goals of what the quality of life that we want to have and what are the characteristics of that, such as doubling, increasing transit ridership by a certain amount, say doubling it, increasing the number of jobs within a certain radius of transit stations to be a certain amount. 50% of all jobs should be within a quarter mile of transit stations. Reducing travel time between between regional centers. That's the example here from some key employment centers in the Seattle region, setting clear targets of how much lower we want those commute times to be. Or on the fare policy saying, transportation and housing should make up no more than X% of household costs. Starting there, as far as having this public conversation of where we want to get to and working back to generate the project ideas. I'll just end there. That is still, I think, in spite of all of these great advances in how we're doing, Plan Bay Area 2050 as opposed to 2040, it's still not really how I understand we're approaching the network design of our region. And thank you.
All right, great, thank you. I'm Martha Cook. I'm from Arup. I do transportation planning there. It's broadly a design and engineering firm for those of you who don't know. And we actually submitted 2 different proposals to the Horizon open call. We were excited when 2 of them, submitted like 5, I think, but 2 of them came in. They are actually related, even though one is about biking, one is about buses, and in a lot of ways are related to what we've been hearing today about doing more with what we already have and giving people options and sort of increasing flexibility in ways to move around the Bay Area. So broadly speaking, as we talked about, we all kind of know what the problem is, a dramatic image of it. And this is actually from like decades ago, I think, so it's an ongoing problem. Constrained regional mobility. The Bay Area is enormous. It's something like 7,000 square miles, ranging from Napa Valley with a density of something around 100 people per square mile to San Francisco, which is well over 7,000. And we are limited. One of the cool things I think about Plan Bay Area is that it has to be fiscally constrained. So we're trying to think about what are real solutions to these very real problems and not just dreaming as big as we can, which would love to do, but trying to find some answers here. So 2 of the solutions we thought about are just maximizing our existing right-of-way and specifically our existing freeway right-of-way. The curse and the benefit of Eisenhower's interstate system is that we now have major right-of-ways that travel throughout the country, throughout the region, and really connect us all in a way that our train networks don't right now and our transit networks don't right now. So the general framework that we were thinking about with these projects is how can we improve mobility while using the existing right-of-way to create greater mode choice and greater efficiency. And this has equity built right into it. If we can give people more options and if we can give them more flexibility truly, then we'll improve sort of public health outcomes, we'll improve access to jobs, we'll improve everyone's ability to pursue sustainable modes. We wanted to enable an infrastructure that can actively compete with cars. So we saw the Rex proposal has really beautiful numbers about how bus systems can very truly compete with cars. And we want to complement biking, walking, and transit throughout the region. The project we put forward, the general goal is improve what we have and not compete with sort of the existing transit projects that are out there. So the first vision was an overhaul of I-80, sort of as what we think one should do with highways generally, but what we could start by doing with I-80 specifically. And so the idea is to right-size the freeway to sort of future-proof it, and got a little cut off here, but basically reconsider what the role of a freeway is and what the design of a freeway is. And this involved a lot of different interventions. And we had 3 phases, and broadly speaking, we were talking about taking out certain ramps, tunneling parts of the freeway, taking out remaining spurs, like that last vestigial piece of the Central Freeway in San Francisco, and basically finding ways that we can design freeways at the surface level in urban areas to maybe take out ramps so that pedestrians are safer and that it feels better for them down there. Add HOV lanes or meter every ramp or toll the entire corridor so that transit now can operate more effectively, and you're adding a pricing component to people in single vehicles. So phase 1, we figure meter all the on-ramps, toll the corridor, improve transit options, because of course if you're going to make it more difficult for somebody to drive, you've got to give them more options. And the back of the envelope estimate is 150 million a year in toll revenue if priced competitively, aggressively, if I may. And this little image here is just showing where some interventions would be on the approach to the toll plaza in Oakland. Phase 2 would involve the really dramatic stuff that I like, removing the remainder of the Central Freeway, trimming 280 back to 16th Street, this grade separating Union Pacific up in Berkeley, adding a BART station over in Richmond where I-80 and BART hit. And this is one of the neat things that we saw with the Salesforce Transit Center is that taking out these large swaths of land would net you, I don't know, 500 million maybe in land value. And so this is one of the other benefits about reducing the footprint of the freeway is that this is valuable land in the Bay Area. We have a lot of people here. We are limited in land in a lot of places, and especially as we're making these more competitive and attractive transit corridors, we'll be better served if we start to put our housing near there. And we can do that if we get rid of some of the excess. You can tell my feelings about this. Phase 3 is removing ramps and realigning I-80 throughout Alameda and Contra Costa, and then bringing I-80 below grade in San Francisco. And so this, get a little bit of land value there because San Francisco. And one of the appeals to us sort of as a group as we are coming up with this idea is that even just as a pilot project, it's probably too minor of a term for it, but this I-80 redesign does touch a lot of parts of the Bay Area. It goes through major job centers, San Francisco, Oakland, Richmond, and it's sort of right in the center of the region. So even starting with this stretch to model what you could gain benefit-wise from this sort of consideration of freeways is pretty vast. And then the second, very close to my heart, was the regional bikeway vision. And I know Spur's been looking into this also as well. But across region bikeway network, fully separated from vehicle traffic, that can be like a highway. We, I think taking Spur's leave, had tried to stop saying the word highway because there are alternatives to that. So a bikeway vision. And this picture down here, you can't quite see it, but this is US 36 in Denver, between Denver and Boulder in Colorado. And they actually, through a large pot of, I think with sales tax money, they redid US 36, added an HOV lane so they could start running high quality express bus service on it. But as they were rebuilding the entire highway, they added an 18-mile commuter sort of bikeway alongside it. And these are the sorts of things you can do. If you have that existing right of way, if as our freeways are falling into repair, they need major reconstruction, that's the time to do it. That's the place to do it. Also, it's beautiful. So the vision here is that you can have a safe option for getting around for biking that, yes, can serve people in commute, but commute trips are often 20% of people's trips. So it's also a recreational option. It's also something where if you make it comfortable and easy, you're going to start getting those interested but concerned riders who don't really feel like bendy posts will save them, but an actual separate lane might. Phase 1, this is our sort of very crude map, but the first thing is just follow the freeways. We already have this right of way. Freeways are relatively well graded compared to, you don't have a freeway going right up Telegraph Hill or anything. So they already connect major regional connections. So we figured start there. Phase 2 is connecting city centers and sort of expanding, going across the bridge and closing some of those major gaps. And then starting to get into more local things like repaving street surfaces with bike lanes whenever you were doing those and making that sort of the default option, and then installing bike priority where necessary or helpful. And then phase 3 is not just supporting cycling as a commute mode, but as a regular sort of unsurprising mode choice that becomes mundane and very easy for folks to use. And then bringing it out into rural areas. The other benefit of this too, especially up in Napa where they've already got these planned, is they do become recreational routes, and you can start to support public health and the mundanity of biking through recreational use of these trails. And then this key point at the bottom is really probably one of the biggest points, is you have to fund bicycle education both in schools for people learning how to bike, but also as a fundamental part of driver education. So this is sort of the make biking normal phase. And that's it.
Okay, thank you all. I've been asked to be quick, so I'm going to just go over what I'm supposed to present and not digress too much. As you have seen, there's I mean, everyone submitted these projects as like really transformative projects, combining a lot of different ideas, making them like really large projects with some things that you can model and some things that you just cannot model, like something like branding, for example, right? And here we are stuck in this process of like, this is the way we are doing things in terms of like modeling projects and seeing what benefits come out of this model. So it is like, let's use it as a tool to like understand what the impact of this project can be, but also be aware of like, as everyone has said, like aware of like what the limitations are or what we have not been able to showcase through this process. So really terribly sorry, I apologize that we are not able to share findings on these projects. It's still in progress due to a variety of reasons. Modeling being one of them. It has been like extremely complicated to model some of these projects. They are really stretching the imagination of our modelers. But yeah, just for those of you who don't know, there was a process of like over 400 submissions that came in, and we dwindled it down to like these 12 submissions that we would study alongside all the projects submitted by the CTA, the county agencies and the transit agencies. So we hope to have results of these by like December or in our final release in January. So on the bicycle project, so we are limited in what we can do in our current travel model 1.5 because streets are either bike facilities or they're not bike facilities. The model doesn't understand like what quality of bike facilities these are. Okay, clearly that's a huge limitation. Our travel model 2 that is in development will eventually be able to look at these kind of distinction facilities. But there was obviously a lot of interest, not just from Martha and other people, but like also counties like trying to submit like different bikeways. So we really wanted to like make some effort in trying to understand what the benefits of a big bike investment could be. And so we said like, okay, you know what, let's throw in everything there. Let's extend our existing bike network. Let's build all these bikeways. Let's build the bike superhighways. Let's complete the Bay Trail, the Bay Bridge West Penn bike path. All that might be a huge investment. And it might be like 10,000, it might like bring in 10,000 miles of bikeways. And that can cost up to $10 billion or so. But still, like, as I said, we don't know how to represent this in the model. And so we refer to literature you might be well aware of from Portland State, that says that, well, if we put in 10,000 miles of bike infrastructure density, and given the density that might generate, how might mode share shift? How might bike mode share shift? And so today the bike mode share is maybe 3 to 4%, maybe it changes to 6 to 7% with this bike infrastructure density. So the question we're trying to answer with our modeling is, if we expect bike mode share to change with that level of investment, what are the benefits of this investment, and could that outweigh the costs? And we did see that the benefits significantly outweigh costs. There was huge accessibility benefits with like people using them, especially in urban areas. The average trip length was like about 3 miles, and also like huge health benefits and emission benefits that come out as part of this process. But again, like, we're not able to comment on the individual bike investments that actually would be good as part of this process. I think what we're trying to say is like, we ought to consider or prioritize a bigger investment in active transportation. On some transit projects, we had this project on BRT on all bridges. The idea being, let's just convert a lane on all bridges to allow buses to free flow. And so that's how we model it, but we also model it with an alternative of like, you know what, like just making a lane with our existing buses is not going to be sufficient. Like, let's double the frequency on all the existing buses that go on these bridges, which are like AC Transit Transit or Dumbarton Express or Lynx. So yeah, I mean, I don't have results to share again, but I mean, what we have learned is like bridges are very congested resources, and taking a lane away is quite detrimental to auto users. So curious to see like how that actually pans out when we double the frequency. And I imagine that would work well in a much more transit supportive environment where there's like real policies to dissuade people from driving. On Smart to Richmond, this was a project. It is getting smart from San Rafael to Richmond BART on a new bridge that would support this kind of a rail line. But we do recognize that's going to be an extremely expensive project on a train line that already has pretty low ridership. Then this project that Chris talked about is our optimized express lane network and express bus network. And so we're modeling this as a fully connected express lane network throughout the Bay Area, but without any freeway widening. The current express lane project that we're evaluating, submitted by different agencies, has a bunch of widening, like half the mile, as Chris said, like half the miles are wide, half the lanes are widening. And we said, like, no, so this does not include any widening of lanes. But it is a slightly complicated way of, when we model it, is because we have to calibrate the tolls on all these express lanes, right? So we have to like run the model and then look at what the speeds were on those express lanes. And then we are trying to calibrate the tolls so that the speeds are at 45 miles per hour. So these are actually free-flowing express lanes. And then we layered in the Rex network on top of it. We set fares. We did not incorporate the means-based fare that was part of the proposal, just because like for all the other projects also, we did not do that. And so we wanted to see like what the impact of this bus network would be on its own, understanding obviously that like those kind of policies are important for the success of such projects. I mean, what we have learned from, so that's the fare we set at 4.5, like kind of commensurate or even cheaper than AC transit transfer fares today, and the feeder routes were all $2.5. As Chris recognized, this project has a lot of expensive capital improvements. It has a bus tunnel that runs from Berkeley to Oakland. It has a bus tunnel on the 19th Street corridor. These are all expensive improvements that are part of the project. Also, I will note that like express buses, like especially, for example, the Trans Bay, tend to serve a higher income population. That's just because the region they serve, and also because we think that it's usually the people who belong to higher income groups that make longer trips that are more transit accessible the way the transit network is set up today. But again, hope to have findings soon on this. We had a project for free transit, again, and fare integration. Those were the two transit fare policies. The things we are seeing, as I said, like transit ridership is quite significant to fare, but our current system is not equipped to handle that kind of increase in demand that we might see with free transit or fare integration. So free transit for all, especially is just really breaks the system. But like maybe we're also testing a project for free transit for just lower income households on how that might change ridership. For the fare integration, but we don't change capacity for the free transit just because we have limited time as well. And so on the fare integration one, the way we're testing this is as like a three-step approach. First, let's consider some core projects that improve the capacity, expand the capacity of our system, especially all the regional networks. So like AC Transit, Trans Bay expansion, like frequency expansion, or like Caltrain or BART core capacity, like those kind of projects that really build the capacity of our system. And then we're looking at integrated fares, and this is one way we threw out there how we are modeling this, where we said $2.50 for all local bus and LRT, $3.50 as a base fare for regional trips under 10 miles, and then we slap on $1 for every incremental 10 miles. Understanding like these kind of this kind of fare policy is obviously like a huge conversation, and as they pointed out, it comes out of what we hope to come out of this consultant study that we are looking to do over the next year. And this kind of a regional policy, like a distance-based policy, has like equity impacts as well, right? Especially as we talk about suburbanization of poverty. Just because you live farther, then you have to pay a higher fare. But for the sake of modeling, like this is what we put in there. It's hard for us to do like a zone-based fare thing as of now, at least. And then you pay only the regional fare if you're transferring between local and regional transit. So that makes the local fare free if you take a AC Transit bus to the BART, for example. And then a third layer we added in there was the seamless transfers. We like looked at like 10 major nodes across the Bay Area. So like Millbrae BART or Redwood City or Union City BART and or Durden. And we said this is something we were able to do in the model where we set a 2-minute max transfer time between between like any transfer. So if you're transferring from Caltrain to VTA, what if there was a 2-minute transfer? Like how would that change ridership? And so that's our best approach I think we have right now to model this. And we understand there are like way many other things that probably should be taken into account, and other things that are just like policy that's not like it's hard to take into account in modeling. Then there was freeway pricing projects. It was the higher occupancy HOV lanes with the SOV fee, where we said single HOV3 lane across most of the freeway network, but a 20-cent fixed mile per mile fee for all single occupancy vehicles. And also demand-based, means-based tolls on all freeways, so tolls are calibrated for all lanes of the freeway, not just the express lane. And that one is like is really like making the life for our modelers difficult. We literally break the freeway section into like segments and have to look at like how we achieve that potential speed of 45 or lesser, or maybe a slightly lesser, with a toll on all those lanes of the freeway. Not only that, people of lower income households have half that toll rate, or even HOV 2 and 3 might have half that toll rate. And then finally, other freeway projects, and maybe I'm mischaracterizing them as freeway. There's a lot more than freeway, as Martha just described, but these projects, primarily like I-80 also includes a toll all along the freeway. Reversible lanes is like kind of dynamically allocating a lane. So that is also like very interesting to model in terms of when we see there's an available lane in the opposite direction, then it allocates that lane to the other direction. But in that Back to the Future scenario where 14 million people are driving, like lanes are not free in either direction many times. And freight delivery timing regulation, our model is quite limited in terms of modeling freight trucks and freight rail. And so this is something that we just cannot model. So quickly on next steps, we are looking to complete the analysis. Also, as promised, this was a contest. We are looking to, we really appreciate like everyone's efforts in putting these projects forward, working with us very closely in developing this project, but we still want to complement the one that like has the highest performance. And we don't know how we're going to measure that high performance. Is it benefit cost ratio? Is it equity score? We'll have to think about it, but there's a $500 cash prize. And we will release those final findings in January 2020. As I said, our draft findings are online. You can look at it, but the final ones will be out. And then this all informs how we prioritize projects in the planned area. And so for that process, we really recommend, if you're interested, you attend our workshops. They address like specific topics. Our transportation workshop just finished last week, but all these other topic areas, and we're really talking there about policies that maybe complement these projects or work on their own to help resolve all the issues we have as a region. So with that, I think we're done and open to discussion.
So when we were planning this event, we thought, wow, 2 hours is so long. We're going to have lots of time. Not so. And so we are at time, sadly, but we do want to have some time for questions. You all are hearty souls to be here. And so Anne has agreed, and I haven't had a chance to ask you all if we can stay another 10 or 15 minutes. And then you can consider for a moment. Chris, for one, has volunteered to also go to a nearby beverage purveyor and hang out and chat afterwards. And so no real pressure to the rest of the panel, but if yes, it's late, but if others want to go, y'all can think about that and share your answers. And so if folks want to keep it going, it depends on how many of you come. I don't know, maybe we could do that. So we have questions coming in from Zoom. Okay, so these questions have to be quick, and the answers also sadly need to be quick for now, although they could be longer at the bar. Sorry, Zoom, we're not gonna bring you with us. And I know Jason was a project submitter, so I'm gonna take a question from you. And is Jim Stallman still here? You are also on that list of project submitters. So I wanted to maybe prioritize questions and I will table my own questions and prioritize yours. So Jason, you raised your hand real quick, and you can make your question quick.
So there are a lot of great ideas here. It seems like transit agencies themselves may be some of the impediments with respect to fare integration, even with respect to express buses. I know the ETA has proposed discontinuing a bunch of express buses. The question, I guess, for any of you in MTC is, if the modeling shows that these are worthwhile projects, what sort of leadership might we expect from MTC in terms of prodding the transit agencies to go along?
Great question. Can we give that to you? Or can you prod the transit agencies?
So it might be a little above my pay grade to answer this question in terms of prodding other transit agencies. But the approach we are taking this time really is a collaborative solutions-oriented approach. The way we've used this project performance in the past is like saying which projects make it to the plan and which ones do not make it to the plan because they're a bad performer or a high performer. This time we're trying to like really use these findings to highlight the impacts of these projects and think about what policies might pair with those projects to enhance the performance of those projects. And so in talking about that, in talking about like how these projects advance to the plan, we are looking to talk to CTAs, county agencies, on what policies such as fare integration or such as a means-based fare policy might they commit to it, or might they be on the same board of like being open to like understanding what the impacts are through this consultant study, for example, and taking that into account in their planning if they want to implement this project in the plan. I don't know to what extent we're able to do that, but like that's the kind of approach we are taking.
Great. Any other questions? I'll walk around. I'll go Adina and then you. Yeah. Quick questions.
Yeah, so I saw in the scoring on equity that running BART up the Caltrain corridor parallel to Caltrain scored more equitably than increasing capacity on Caltrain. So doesn't that mean that fares are baked in as an assumption? Because if it's going the same path, presumably it's serving the same people. So the only difference is you're assuming the BART fare structure and assuming the current Caltrain fare structure. Is that a correct understanding of what that current modeling does, baking in the fares as an assumption, even as we're spending billions of dollars in capital?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
The fare that is taken as part of the project is based on like what today's fares are. And so yes, that is like an interesting insight that the BART fare structure might be promoting more usage on all income levels rather than a Caltrain fare structures. And so if we are talking about going forward with implementing these projects, how should maybe Caltrain reconsider their fare structure, or like maybe fare integration or means-based fares like help support that kind of fare policy. But yeah, of course, like fare is part of the assumption on how we code this project.
I mean, I think what that sort of seems to suggest, though, is that we need to almost do a second version of the equity scoring with, like, especially if integrated fares is, you know, one of our highest performing transit projects. It's like we need to almost redo the equity to take out that assumption, or to have an assumption baked in and see how the equity score changes. If we're going to put a lot of stock into that equity scoring, that would be my observation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually would be, in an ideal world, that would be a very powerful thing to do, right? It's like, what happens with the status quo versus what happens if you do X, Y, Z? Similarly, you know, with all of our projects, we had the opportunity to have one model run, right? So if, for example, Rex, as vast of a proposal as it is, if we have a bunch of weak links in there, then that could drive down the rest of the system. So, you know, with this first round, you know, hopefully we learn some things. How cool would it be if we can iterate and then propose something that's even better?
Sure. I just on what Adina was saying, that it is more advantageous to build a completely parallel system because the fares on that system are cheaper than to make the fares on the existing system cheaper. So just, I want to make sure that point gets across, that fares are,
doesn't make any sense.
right, so fares are mutable. They're a choice that we make, and that's kind of the whole and the fair integration strategy, the projects we make, how we design and develop our transportation systems are very, very mutual in this case, and so we should have our infrastructure choices and be complementary.
Thank you. I'm gonna go back here, and we have a Zoom question next.
Yeah, so just a quick question about scenario planning. You know, I think there's this assumption that these three scenarios are, okay. I think there's an assumption that these three scenarios that we've seen are sort of exogenous to the modeling process, right? Because we're going ahead and modeling this transit system in 2050 or whatever year we're bringing it out to. But there's no reasonable future in which we get the quote unquote good concentration of land use and housing and jobs where we haven't already invested heavily in transit. So there might be some unreasonable outcomes in terms of, well, you can't model scenario 3 and then look at building this project, because to actually get to the land use and housing that we've seen in scenario 3, that project would have already had to be built to enable it, right? So I'm just thinking about that and thinking about the three scenarios that we've used here. Obviously, you have to constrain the optimization in some way. So is there like a likelihood weighting that's kind of applied to the three scenarios? I mean, if there's a project that does well under 2 of the 3, but not the third, does that matter more which of the 3 it is based on, you know, which one MTC thinks is actually the most likely outcome based on like a business as usual trajectory, for example?
So the futures are not meant to be, none of them are meant to be like aspirational futures, or nor is that, nor are we going to use that as our ideal future, like as we go forward in the planning process. It was only to think, like kind of draw out 3 different potential futures that might happen and stress test like perform differently in different conditions. I mean, the feedback we have gotten in the past is by evaluating projects only in one particular scenario, then we're not understanding like how that project might, well, how might that project change if land use was different in this area. And so this was a way for us to like draw out 3 different land uses with different populations, even testing with like a really high population, basically to try and tell us like, okay, there are some projects that are not going to perform well, even if the population was super high. And yeah, so the way our land use is structured, it's based on the PDA framework, if you're aware of it, of Plan Bay Area 2040, and that's how the assumptions are built in. So it's not based on any particular transit project. But yes, that is the critique we've always received in the past of like, well, a smart extension might work if we model a bunch of land use in that area. And so that's the effort we tried to make here, where within the existing PDA framework, if the population goes up to 12 million or 14 million, let's see if the project, let's see if you understand the project performed well. So we're not trying to weight it amongst different futures too, but we're just trying to see like how performance varies and how what we can learn from that in terms of thinking about what policies would be more important to one project or the other. Like for example, as I said, if it did not work well in the low growth future, it means that land use policy is very important for that project.
Great. I'm going to do some rapid fire questions from Zoom. We've got an audience online as well. So one quick question with maybe a quick answer for Anoop. Can MPC ABAG share scenario criteria and modeling techniques with county and local planning efforts? Basically, if this is the best, can we make it a standard and share with the local jurisdictions?
We can share it if they want to use it to plan it. I mean, we have efforts like where we are trying to make everyone like establish a base land use. That's part of our basis effort to like so everyone's kind of using the same land use. We are also making efforts for everyone to use the same travel model going forward. One of the other counties already uses the same travel model, but yeah, it really depends on the local jurisdictions if they want to use our planning process. I know like BART is trying to, or BART, or maybe I'm not remembering correctly, but one other agency is trying to use our futures, 3 different future scenarios to also think about their project.
Great. So it's open for sharing, but you can't require it. Yeah. So quick question for Spur, for Ariel. Can you say a little bit more about secret modeling and strong leadership? And then I'll queue up a quick one for Ian next. If you can briefly discuss your legislative proposals, and I would just maybe encourage you to direct people to maybe a place where they can find them after Ariel answers.
You're modeling leadership. I think this question. This takes getting all this done. The model can show everything it wants, but it's really going to take leaders to make this happen. And maybe behind every good model needs to be a great leader who's learning how to believe the model, to take it, not just the model, but what we hear from the customers, what we know from other regions, and move and make change. And that's that basic idea. It's like no model is going to show you the role of leadership, but we know leadership really matters to get things done.
And there's a description. We have a blog post on our website, seamlessbayarea.org. One of our most recent blog posts describing our legislative proposals very briefly. We are proposing initiating a process of governance reform mandated through state legislation that would be connected with a regional funding measure, either as part of provisions of a regional funding measure or as part of a separate companion bill that would set clear targets for reducing vehicle miles traveled and increasing transit mode share, that would put conditions on future funding, connecting it to an integrated system, and that would initiate a process of governance reform by creating a state commission on transportation governance and funding that would assess all of the institutions that we currently have and require at the end of a 1 to 2 year process certain regional functions of our transit system being done at a regional level rather than at a transit agency by transit agency level, but not specifying where exactly that should reside. That would be studied by this commission process. Very quick summary.
I have a yes answer to another question. Is Rex electrified? Yes. And then last question, hopefully with a brief answer from Anoop, is that a lot of our transportation infrastructure is in low-lying areas and sea level rise. So is sea level rise adaptation included in the models? And I think it's in one of the futures. Is that right?
So of those 93 projects, there are, I think, 6 projects that are targeted towards saving. I mean, we looked at transportation assets of this, so saving, like, not saving, but making sure that sea level rise does not affect like 101, 580 in Marin, or 101 in the peninsula, or like near the Dumbarton Bridge. So there's like 6 locations where we looked at, and these protections would also like support local communities there in terms of preventing sea level rise and where there might be houses. And so, and all of those projects like fared well in all futures. And so those were some of the low cost improvements where we said are beneficial in all futures.
Great. I think we're done. So follow up question. First, another round of applause. Thank you for the lightning questions. And you're clapping for yourselves too. Thank you for staying. And yes, good job. And follow-up questions can happen, at least for Chris, at Louis is nearby. So let's go. Hey, Ann said, try Louis. We can hang out here a little bit. Is anybody else free for a drink? Maybe? Yeah. Maybe. Okay, great.
I know there's a couple of transformers too there.
And yes, a couple of us will be there too. Thank you all again. Thank you for being here. Excuse me.